Gaza health authorities say Israeli shelling has killed 21 people and left at least 64 others injured west of Rafah. They say fire from Israeli tanks hit a cluster of tents in Al-Mawasi, which Israel has previously designated a safe area for Palestinian civilians. The Israeli army has denied it targeted the area. Meanwhile, a US-built temporary pier that has been taking humanitarian aid to Palestinians for less than 2 weeks will be moved from the coast of Gaza for a short time after the US said it was damaged. The pier is one of the few portals for food and other supplies to get into Gaza amid the ongoing conflict. There has been strong international condemnation of the strike, but the former Consul General of Israel, Alon Pincus, says the response in Israel has been mixed.
On the one hand, Israelis have not been exposed to most of the footage and most of the horrific and gory pictures emanating from Gaza that perhaps Australians, certainly Europeans and Americans have been exposed to. And so they may not realize what exactly went on. Number two, they've been hardened to the point of being oblivious to what's going on in Gaza because the devastation of October 7th was truly overwhelming. On the other hand, it sort of highlighted the fact that this war is unwinnable, that it is going on without a political objective, that it is not clear what exactly Israel thinks it can achieve or what is achievable indeed in Rafah. So you had a mixed reaction. Politically, there's the political dimension. There was no question about it. You know, if you ask around the pundits, the analysts, the military experts, that this will bring increased pressure on Israel in the next few days throughout the world, particularly in the U.S. But I have to say, parenthetically, that the U.S. until now has responded in a very bland and non-committal way. But again, until now. And the notion is that this will bring pressure on Israel to agree to a ceasefire unrelated or irrespective of a hostage deal. So that more or less is the response.
Alon, you and others have said that political survival is central to any move Netanyahu makes. Benny Gantz is a member of Israel's war cabinet. He told Netanyahu he'll quit if, quote, you choose the path of fanatics and lead the entire nation to the abyss. What do you make of this fracture?
Not much, I have to say, because Mr. Gantz had 8 full months to realize that his influence on decision-making is minimal at best and zero at worst. That there have been several cases or occasions in which both he and his political partner, Gadi Eisenkot, who also happens to be a former chief of staff of the Israel Defense Forces, have said that this is a war without without clear and coherent political objectives, that it is fought wrongly, that the force employment and force deployment are unsatisfactory, and that Mr. Netanyahu is mismanaging the war. And that's been said, yet it hasn't moved them into quitting the government. Now, as you correctly pointed out, Gemma, Mr. Gantz presented last week sort of an ultimatum. He said, if by the 8th of June, I don't see a clear, coherent plan, implementable, to move the war forward or to tie it to a post-war political scenario, then I will leave the government. Well, 8th of June is just a week, 10 days away. And you know what? I'm not sure that Mr. Gantz is not going to find some other excuse or pretext to stay in the government. He's going to say that, well, there have been events, there are decisions that need to be made. I wouldn't put too much on that.
As to the International Criminal Court considering arrest warrants for Netanyahu and others, is this development dividing Israelis or uniting them?
Well, it's neither. You know, it's a political thing. I mean, in general, there is resentment and frustration over both the International Court of Justice that issued a provisional injunction last week asking Israel to halt operations in Rafah within 30 days, and the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which you just alluded to, that is threatening, is not yet issued arrest warrants against Mr. Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, both on charges of committing or facilitating or enabling war crimes. And people are resentful and frustrated and angry because they think this creates a false moral equivalency between Hamas and Israel on the one hand, and that this is persecution, and that the ICJ and the ICC did not do this in other instances, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, people who know, people who understand, realize that that these two courts deal with different things. And they understand that from an international legal point of view, there's a case to be made. I'm not saying it's a clear case. I'm not saying it can be proven. But the public in general does not like neither the ICJ ruling or the ICC threat of arrest warrants. However, this did not translate into support for Netanyahu. The ICC is issuing an arrest warrant against Mr. Possibly, issuing an arrest warrant against the Prime Minister individually. It's not against the State of Israel. People are not, the average Joe walking in the street right now, he's not an expert, he or she are not an expert on international law. But that did not translate into political support for Mr. Netanyahu. So if you assume that these rulings or opinions have unified Israelis, they have not.
And there have been fears this war would spread further in the region. Now, some have questioned if this skirmish at the Egypt-Gaza border at the Rafah crossing between Israeli and Egyptian soldiers, in which an Egyptian soldier was killed, could threaten a spillover. What's your read of this? No.
I think that was a mishap. That was a miscalculation. That was someone who was trigger happy and someone who misinterpreted movement on the other side. No. The expansion or the escalation, indeed, of this into the region pertains mostly to Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, and in the broader circle into Israel and Iran, which, as you recall, obviously, between the 13th and 14th of April of last month, did exchange a few salvos of missiles. But you have to, if you look at the grand picture, 8 months into the war, with President Biden, the American President Biden, on the 10th of October, warning Iran and Hezbollah not to escalate this, the famous speech in which he said, don't, quote unquote, don't do this. If you look at the last 8 months, it's been tense in that respect, in terms of broadening or escalating the war, but it hasn't happened. It hasn't happened, certainly not to the extent or on the scale that it doesn't mean that it won't happen, but I'm saying 8 months later, it hasn't happened.